So welcome, Eva. It's great to have you with us today.
Hey, Melita, it's great to be here.
Now, you are a marketing strategist, but what I really particularly interested in what you do around thought leadership. That's something we haven't spoken about yet on the show. We've talked about content strategy. We've talked about using your voice in different ways, but thought leadership, I think, is something particularly interesting. So I'm going to pick your brains and find out all about what that is and how people can integrate that into their strategy and when's it the right time to use that and so on. But first, I would love to know, how did you come to be a thought leader strategist?
Yes, well, it wasn't on purpose, as is true of many, many women entrepreneurs probably listening, and that we both know. But I started my business over 6 years ago, actually because I was working in a corporate job and it kind of imploded in a pretty unhappy way. And I felt like, all right, I've got to get out. And at the time I was young and I didn't have, like, I was living in a group house and my rent was low. And I just had, it was like felt like a pretty safe time to take a risk because I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. And so I started a business, and I was doing marketing and communications at first. And it was really, really hard at first, because I started my business with like not even a glimmer of a plan, really no education in entrepreneurship at all. It was very much a situation where I was naive enough, like I was too naive to be scared, even though kind of everybody I told that I was doing this, they were like, okay, Eva, like, it's going to be really hard. And I never found that very helpful because I didn't know if they were trying to warn me away from doing it or trying to prepare me in this very vague, non-specific way. So anyway, I started the business, and I was doing marketing and communications for just entrepreneurs in my local area whom I knew personally. And the business very kind of gradually and slowly started to gain momentum organically through networking and referrals. And that was fine. I had great client relationships that I loved, and I was learning a lot. I was like, a lot of self-teaching was going on. But over the years, it kind of dawned on me that marketing and communications felt simultaneously too big and too small. Like, it's such a broad category, and there are so many strategies and tactics and technology that's changing all the time when it comes to marketing. But at the same time, it felt a little bit like, well, a lot of people do marketing, and that's not really what lights me up. What lights me up is, I realized over time, is the pre-marketing state of creation, where you have in your mind and in your body a wealth of experiences and in perspective and insight into your industry, and turning that into assets that you can market, that can help and impact people, that can help you kind of continue to develop your thinking and really make it your unique and your own. That creation process, which I call thought leadership now, is really what gets me excited, particularly when it comes to doing it for and with women entrepreneurs. So that's how I wended from marketing and communications to thought leadership, advisory, and strategy. And I work with my clients to market their thought leadership, but it's that we have to first do the thought leadership creation portion before we can start marketing.
I love that process. And I love that you just got started in a whole like state of ignorance is bliss. And I think sometimes I speak to a lot of entrepreneurs, and they were like, I would never have done this first if I knew how hard it was going to be. But
right,
the fact that they had done it really helped them get to that next stage. And we always see on the show that where you start is never where you end up. You always evolve and grow. You start somewhere, then you realize, oh, well, it's this part of it that I really enjoy, or it's this bit that makes me stand out and that's different. And it's this bit that my clients are loving the most, or whatever it may be. But then you needed to start somewhere, and then chunk that down and follow your passions. And your passion isn't always clear to start with. Some people have that real clear drive. This is exactly what I want to do. But for most, it's kind of like, well, I kind of could do this. I know that's certainly where I started. I was like, well, maybe I could just do this little thing. And I mentioned it to someone and got my client. I was like, okay, well, someone's going to pay me for it. Brilliant. And just kept going. And it's kind of evolved over time. So it's interesting to see how that journey has panned out for you. And you're so right when it comes to marketing. That's my background, marketing comms as well. And I know I've worked in non-profits, I've worked in the UN, in corporate, in small businesses and solopreneurs. And yeah, it can be a huge topic. And there's so many different scopes within that. And there's like the communication part, the strategy part, the analysis part, the branding part. There's like so many things to it. So I can understand why small businesses, small business owners get completely overwhelmed with it. But I think it can be also for smaller businesses, it can just be really simple. You just want to connect with people and that's it. Create some meaningful connection and have a conversation around that. So the thought leadership piece, with that in mind, does that help make that connection easier and those conversations easier? How does it fit within a small business marketing strategy?
Yeah, so there's two ways that it fits. So one is exactly like you said, you know, when you become known for your thought leadership, it paves the way to make those connections you're talking about, Melita. It starts that process for you. So people have an opportunity to listen to your podcast, read your blog articles, watch your video series, download your lead magnet, your PDF or your ebook. And that allows them to start getting to know you and get a feel for what you offer and what you know and kind of how you come across before they would feel comfortable having a consult call with you or hiring you. And so it kind of sets the stage to make these connections that you're talking about. They happen more quickly, they happen more easily. And by the time that someone's coming to you and wants to actually talk to you, they've kind of already vetted themselves because they've spent enough time with your thought leadership to know if you're a likely fit for them to hire or if they just don't really feel drawn to you. So that's, you know, in terms of, and I want to, you know, be clear that thought leadership production and development it's not a sales strategy, right? This is a long-term, I think about marketing and thought leadership as a lifestyle, right? Like you're investing in this the way you invest in, you know, your retirement account. You keep at it and you keep at it and you keep at it because you know it's going to pay you dividends down the line, but you're not going to reap the benefits next weekend. And so it's important to kind of set that expectation because it does take a lot of consistent doing to produce the results that thought leadership can bring you. And the second way I think it fits really well into a small business strategy is the impact that it has on you professionally and personally in terms of, you know, by investing in your thought leadership, you are consistently, I guess, strengthening your own relationship with your thoughts and your ideas, and you're developing them. I mean, it's the same way practicing anything makes you good at it. Practicing thought leadership, it makes it so much easier for you to have sales calls because you get practice really articulating what you stand for and what you do. It helps you on podcast interviews because, again, you're in the practice of talking about what you think and what you stand for. And that's actually a benefit that I did not expect when I started developing my own thought leadership and working on it with my clients, is the impact it would have on my confidence and my ability to talk about what I do effortlessly and with a lot of passion and with a lot of uniqueness. Because I find when you're working on your ideas, you're going to come up with interesting processes and phrases and names for things that are really your own. And those, again, reinforce this relationship building you're doing and make you memorable.
It's interesting. I was reading an article about Mozart this morning, and he was always very talented, obviously, but it was only when he decided that he was going to write music his way that things started to take off for him.
Interesting.
And I think he was in his early 20s when he decided to focus in on his music and do something different. And he really challenged himself to be creative. And he said he's never really had that energy and creativity and was able to then kind of work from the inside out rather than saying, oh, they've done that, and oh, this is the standard way, and this is what always has to happen at this stage in the music. And I love that concept, and it really echoes what you were just saying, that it's really your chance to get creative, sit with your ideas and see where they take you, and you can then go deeper into some of the concepts, and that can be then the point of connection with other people as well, where you can really relate to it. But one question I have, I know a lot of, particularly the women that I speak to, well, mainly I speak with women more than men, so maybe they have the same problem, I don't know, but it's a lot of women have this idea that they're not yet expert enough. What would you say to someone like that? Can they become a thought leader?
Yes, this is a great question, Melita. I'm so glad you asked. I think of this as qualification itis, where you perpetually feel like you're not qualified enough to do fill in the blank. In this case, it's you're not qualified enough to be a thought leader. And I think part of the reason it's easy for women to fall into this trap is because we might see thought leaders out in the world. And in the United States, ones that come to mind include Brené Brown or Michelle Obama or Oprah, these women who have enormous platforms and far-reaching influence. And the gulf between where we are and what we know and what we see in them seems just insurmountable. And so what's important when you are, yourself and you're feeling some qualification itis is to think of yourself not as necessarily as that you're going to be the next Brené Brown, but that you can be, starting now, a local expert in what you already know and do. Because you can't be your age and providing the services you do without having expertise. And granted, if you're 1 year into your business and it's a brand new industry for you, then maybe it's a little soon to start positioning yourself as a thought leader. But I want to be clear, it's not too soon to start practicing thought leadership. That is, again, this process of developing your own thinking again and again and again. And it's going to change inevitably, and that's a good thing. So remember that when you might feel some perfectionism come up and feel like, I don't know enough yet, this is not going to be perfect. What you know now is going to be different than what you know in a few years, and that's a good thing. But you have what it takes now to be a local expert. And the self-doubt you might feel, or the, again, qualification itis, I think it's really important for us to view that not as a red light, which is how it often feels in our mind and body, but to actually turn that red light into a green light. Because the fact that you feel this uncertain and uncomfortable is a sign that you're doing something challenging. You're doing something that shoves you outside your comfort zone. And like every meme ever says, outside your comfort zone is where the good stuff and the magic happen. And so when you feel that red light, oh no feeling of I'm not good enough yet, or perfectionism, it really helps me to think of that as a positive sign, as a green light to keep going forward. Because if I weren't scared, then I wouldn't be doing something that's going to make a big impact.
Yeah, I really love that point. And I was just having a conversation recently about how we label our emotions, and sometimes how we feel, and we've labeled that a long time ago as being fear. Like, that means I'm frightened. But if we just change that, like, that means I'm about to do something really, really exciting, which could be exactly the same emotions. If we just relabel them, then it can really give us a bit more of the motivation we need to move forward.
Yeah, that's a great point.
So when you mentioned that with thought leadership, it can be a really powerful long-term strategy, but it's not an instant strategy. It takes time for it to take hold. How would you stay motivated in that process? I know when we put in things out there and things aren't happening, it's really hard to keep going. Are there any tips that you have for that?
Yeah. Oh, you're so right. It is hard to stay motivated. And I will tell you, I have fallen off the wagon a couple of times where, I sometimes just don't feel like doing it. And so one thing I've had to coach myself through is this idea, I can sometimes, I catch myself having a lot of all or nothing thinking. Like if I make a commitment to myself that I'm going to write a new article every 2 weeks, if I skip even one of those articles, I feel like, well, there's no point in continuing ever again. I've failed. I can be very dramatic in my mind about what my actions mean. And so one thing is I have to coach myself to just, if I skip one of the commitments that I made to myself for thought leadership, to just get back on the wagon again and again and again. The point is not consistency every single time, although that's ideal, but consistency over time. And so kind of taking the long view is part of how I stay motivated, just in terms of always showing up, even if sometimes I show up and I'm not happy with it. But the other thing that I find motivating, because exactly like you said, and like I said, you're not going to see results right away, usually, is I try to shift my perspective, or rather my definition of success, from the outcomes to the inputs. So the outcomes might be like engagement on social media, lead generation, client conversions, podcast opportunities or speaking opportunities. Those might be outcomes that I'm hoping for from investing in my thought leadership. I can't really control the timing of those and how they're going to happen. What I can control is my input. So I can control that I spend X number of hours a week writing or journaling or sending pitches to people or whatever. Like I can control my inputs. And so that has been that like shift from measuring my thought leadership success to the number of articles I publish rather than the number of followers I gain or new leads that happen in a period of time. That has helped me stay motivated, because I can absolutely promise myself to deliver X articles. I can't make a promise to myself that I'm going to get certain outcomes. So I would say that shift has been really important for keeping me on track and keeping me motivated.
I love that you've raised that, because I think what you've just described is part of the difference between having a business that you run and having a business that runs you. Staying with your goal and setting your standards and saying, like, this is the non-negotiables of what I do. But if I do fall off the wagon, that's okay. I'll forgive myself. I'm only human. At that same time, and really marrying the process and not the results, because you say you have very little control over who's going to say yes or no or engage, and there's so many variables. It just makes it spin. But if
absolutely
putting the thought into you put in the right input, as you say, then that's all you can really do, and it does have a compound effect over time as well.
Exactly.
Talking of which, if someone's just starting out with thought leadership, where would they start? Because you've talked about having a blog and doing podcast interviews, getting in the press, having social media, emails. There are so many opportunities. It's overwhelming. So I can imagine someone going, oh, that's nice, but like I didn't do all of that. It's just me.
Absolutely. Yeah. So you're right. The opportunities or the options are overwhelming. And so I think what has been critical to helping me get started, and also working with my clients to help them get started, is you have to simplify your options. And there's really no magic formula for doing this. You know, it'd be nice if you could kind of like, just like put your preferences into like, I don't know, a function box and it'll spit out exactly what you should do, but that's not how it works. What I recommend is to think about what you enjoy and make your decision based off that. So if you enjoy writing, which I do, writing is my love language, then writing blog articles was a very clear choice to me. And that was all that I did to start, is just the writing of the articles. Because you have to set, or I recommend that you give yourself one thing to work on at a time. So if your first step is just, let me get consistent at writing, you just do that. And once that feels routine and comfortable, then you can add on these other layers of sharing your writing on social media, or pitching your writing to other publications, or repurposing your writing in emails to your list. But what often happens is, especially for entrepreneurs, because we tend to be idea women, right? We've got ideas all the time and we're maximizers and we want to leverage everything. And that's not a bad, I mean, that's a very powerful like strength in terms of a way of thinking, but it can totally sabotage us with overwhelm. And so I think it's really important to let go of that tendency that you're going to have to think about the outcome first and like maximizing it to the nth degree. And instead think about the one committed, consistent action you can take. So I would start there. And if it's for you, maybe it's a podcast, or maybe it could be, I mean, you can get really creative with this too. I mean, you could also host small roundtable sessions where you talk about ideas with a few other women entrepreneurs in your community. And that could be a way that you start developing your thinking. So what's important is to just pick one that really you feel drawn to, because it has to be something that you can sustain over time or it's not going to work.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. My motto that I'm always reminding myself is always, how could this be simpler?
Yes. Oh, please.
Like overcomplicating, taking on too much, and then we kind of burn out and can't manage it, and then feel guilty, and then just stop altogether.
Yeah, and I've done it backwards. I've done it backwards a lot of times. And so if you do it backwards, that's, there's nothing wrong with you. You're in great company. I started where I kind of had this, when I started practicing thought leadership, I had this kind of exhaustive checklist of everything I would do after I wrote the article, all the ways I would repurpose it. And I just didn't do it because it was too much at first. And so even if you start there and you find it's not working and you feel, like you said, Melita, guilty, wondering what's wrong with you, there's nothing wrong with you. Maybe you bit off a little more than you can chew. And so again, like you said, how can you make it more simple?
Mm. And if you're a thought leader and you're always giving value, getting out there, and it's taking time, is there anything you can do to control the monetization of that? It sounds like there could be the danger of you just giving and giving and giving and not getting anything in compensation for your time. Are there any key things to keep in mind in terms of keeping that balance, that value balance?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm glad you asked that, because especially at first, you are, like we've said at a few different points in this conversation, you are giving, right? You're investing over time before you expect to be paid back. But where I think a lot of women entrepreneurs miss out on opportunity to be paid is that we don't take the steps we need to take to close the conversation or close the conversion. And I'm not here just talking about a client conversion, but every time, I remember I worked with Allie Brown. She was a client of mine, and she's a really well-known women entrepreneurs advisor here in the US and internationally. And I remember one time she said to me, anytime you have their attention, ask them to do something. And so when you're working on your thought leadership, I would make it part of your process to always make an ask. And that ask could be leave a comment. That ask could be download this lead magnet. That ask could be send this article to someone you know. Of course, you can't control whether they're going to take the action, but make sure you're always asking, because over time, that's how you build, you build your influence that way, you build your email list that way, and you invite people to take a further step down the path of getting to know you and ultimately work with you if they're the right fit. So I would say that's a really important component of your thought leadership that sometimes gets neglected, is always asking them to do something.
Great advice. I love that. And yeah, you see it all the time. And I used to do communication consultancy when I first started, and so often there was no call to action, and people want to take that next step with you. If they've learned something, they're like, okay, well, what next? What do I do now? And if you just leave them hanging, it doesn't really make for that relationship either. So asking isn't being selfish, it's continuing that relationship and moving them to that next stage in the relationship. So yeah, I love that advice. Thank you.
And that's a good point, Melita, that I wanted to add on to, which is sometimes sometimes we don't ask, and we just talked about that, but I also find that sometimes we ask for too many things. So we might say, leave a comment or send this to a friend and download this lead magnet. And like you were just saying, people they want to know what to do next. And we're doing them a service if we give them one option.
Yes.
Just one option. So in my case, I always invite people to join my email course, my free email course. And that's pretty much it. And that's an evergreen course, so I don't have to go back and change it later if it's like a one-time event. But I would encourage you, as you think about practicing thought leadership, is what's the one, just give them one thing to do, not 7.
Brilliant. Great point. So important, because if you confuse, you lose. And if you give them too many options, they're like, I don't know what to do. And then they don't do anything.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier about some famous thought leaders like Oprah and Michelle Obama. And as you say, these women have these huge platforms, and they're also very outgoing. Thought leadership, is that a strategy that's best suited to extroverts, in your opinion?
Absolutely not. No, I think thought leadership is a strategy. Well, what I love about it, it can be what you make it. There's not one right and wrong way to thought lead. And I think, I identify as an outgoing introvert, right? So I love meeting new people and making connections, but I really prefer that to be in intimate environments, and I need a lot of alone time to kind of recover. So what I find really suitable for me as an introvert and as a thought leader is that thought leadership requires me to spend time alone with my thoughts and with a pen and paper. And sometimes, yes, I talk my ideas out with my partner or with colleagues, but you don't need to be anything other than what and who you are to be a successful thought leader. And if that means, if you're shy, if you're introverted, that doesn't preclude you from being a successful thought leader, but rather you can use thought leadership and you can pick the format and the way you practice it to be one that really suits your energy and your way of being.
Yeah, I love that. And you are totally in control. So you decide what you do. You are the thought leader.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And most, so many effective thought leaders will never get to the level of a Michelle Obama or a Brene Brown. And that doesn't make them any less effective in their local sphere of influence. And so, and your sphere might be, it could be of any size, but the way I think of it is it's not quantity of impact, it's quality of impact, impacting the right people at the right time in a way that's really you, because the way you present your ideas, the insight that you have is unlike anyone else's. And it's going to be the perfect fit for some people. And that's all you're here to do, is to serve those right fit people.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And I think, being an introvert myself as well, I really feel that one of our superpowers is that we don't jump in too soon. We do reflect and make connections and ponder on things, which I think is perfect for thought leadership. And you don't just have to be just out there the whole time, but you have to make a point that's worth listening to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I've mentioned consistency a few times. Frequency is a question people have, like, how often should I be producing some new thought leadership? And again, there's no one answer to that. What's more important than frequency is consistency and quality. And so if, for your stage of life or your amount of time and energy, if that's once per month, you're going to be able to produce a really powerful thought leadership article or an in-depth training or a podcast episode, then that's fantastic. That's plenty.
Yeah, exactly. And the nice thing now is, if you do produce one high quality piece of content, then you can repurpose that, as you were saying before. You can use it in so many different ways.
That's right.
I guess one big advantage of being a thought leader is that you do have clarity around what those thoughts are. I know lots of people are like, well, I don't know what to post, or I don't know where to start, or I have so many aspects to what I do. But with the thought leader, it's clear, well, you share your thought leadership piece. So it's probably quite a nice strategy to start with, and particularly just hone in on, as you say, that quality. And I was asked that question recently as well, how often do I post, and what is too much? And it's like, well, if you're sharing value and helping people to see the world in a different way, then you could post 1 million times a day and people would follow you. But if you're not adding value, if you're not sharing that quality of content, then even once a month is too much. So
Yeah.
it's really, as you say, I love that you really honed in on that quality over quantity aspect.
Yeah, and I think it's important too when if you're getting started, or even if you're maybe pivoting in your thought leadership focus, that the clarity and focus that you just talked about, Melita, that does come over time. It's, at first when I started, I was writing about more broad topics than I do now, and that was just part of my development. I was feeling out different ideas. I was learning the language that I wanted to use. And so it's really important to be patient with your own process and to, start where you are now. If you don't feel like you have any semblance of clarity or focus, that's very normal. You can still start by noticing, being an astute observer, like a student of yourself, and noticing what ideas excite you, and then trying to figure out why and how do they relate to the services that you offer. And that's the process of kind of following your excitement and learning to tie it back to what you do. That over time, you'll get more clear and more clear and more clear.
Yeah. And when you're sharing short thought leadership content, getting tongue-tied, do you always have to have the answers?
Heck no. No, I mean, that's a good point. Like, and I think that's where a lot of us, like, as a, recovering perfectionist or whatever, I certainly find that challenging sometimes. But even, I mean, many experts don't have the answers, or there are many instances historically where people, like experts, have made predictions that didn't come to pass. I mean, you don't have to have all the answers. In fact, sometimes your thought leadership can consist of asking really probing questions, or helping somebody look at a problem in a new light. It doesn't mean you solve the problem for them, but you're helping them to see it in a new way. And so I think that if thought leadership consisted of just people having the right answer all the time, it would be so very boring. Rather, I think of thought leadership is to be provocative, to make people curious, to get them thinking. And people don't usually feel, curious and inclined to think deeply about a topic if they're just kind of spoon-fed an answer. So in fact, I think asking really good questions and exploring ideas and telling stories is so much more powerful than, trying to feel like you have to have the right answer.
Yeah. And I think if you ask questions, you really draw people into the conversation, and you break down the barriers. Sometimes if you're too perfect or too expert, people are like, well, I could never be that. And so as you were talking about with Oprah, there's just so far away that they're just not approachable, and it's kind of nice, but it's not for you. But if you have that slight vulnerability and leave the door open for conversation, and I can really imagine you bring people in, and you can even further your thought, because very often when you have two people talking about one subject, you start to see new ideas emerging as well that can help further your thinking. So even though you're the thought leader, absolutely, you don't need to be the thought ender either. You're really,
yeah, I really like the way you put that, Melita, like thought leader, not thought ender. And sometimes, a thought leader needs to take some time being a thought follower. Like you said, you might find yourself inspired by other ideas, and it'll advance your own thinking. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking about in 2020, Michelle Obama's podcast came out, and she acknowledged in one episode that she was struggling with some depression. And that was a hugely popular episode and just thing that happened. It got a ton of press coverage to have this high profile woman acknowledge that she was, having some mental health challenges, because all of us can relate to that. And I think, you mentioned this at the beginning, Melita, you asked about how does thought leadership help you with making relationships, right? Like forging new relationships, which is how a business grows. And I think it's this bringing your human self and, being open when you feel comfortable being open, and acknowledging that you don't have the answers, but you're asking a lot of questions. That's the part of thought leadership that's relationship building. And in fact, I think the most effective thought leadership that I'm drawn to is about, it helps me build relationships, either with the author or with somebody else that I share the article with or the podcast episode with, so we can talk about it. And so that the relationship building aspect of it is perhaps my one of my favorite parts.
And you mentioned also about storytelling, and I guess there's even scope not just to ask questions, but own up to your mistakes, because often that's where the biggest lessons lie for ourselves, and those are lessons that we can share to take people on that journey with our thoughts too.
Absolutely, yeah. Storytelling. I mean, storytelling is older than any of us are. Like, that's as ancient as humanity itself. And so there's a reason why we're drawn to thought leaders that tell really good stories, that open up about themselves and facilitate conversations that are honest and insightful. There's a reason that those resonate with us. And there's nothing special about people you see doing that, other than the fact that they're doing it. You have just as much of an ability to tell your stories and to be that same kind of a light for people when it comes to what you do and what you know.
Yeah, exactly. You always have to start somewhere. You can't start out as the expert. It's what you become in the process of trying and getting out there. And as you say, just start with one thing, keep it simple, and see where it takes you, and have that courage and enjoy the journey.
Yeah. I mean, it's more fun, in my opinion, to be good at something than to be new at something. But you don't get the latter without the former. You have to start by being new. And yeah, like you said, there's nowhere to start but where you are. That's the right place.
Yeah, exactly. Eva, I've really enjoyed our discussion today, and
me too.
And really exploring this idea of thought leadership. And I think it's something that that a lot of the audience are now going to go and explore a bit more, because I think it's just such a great strategy for for female-owned businesses, particularly if you have that expertise and you want to really live your purpose through your business. Then it's a wonderful strategy that can really help support that and help that business to come together quicker. So it's a great topic to have the opportunity to speak about.
Excellent. I'm so glad.
In the process of building your business, is there any other advice that we haven't touched on yet that you'd like to share back to people? Or, in the early days when all those women or people were sharing back to you, oh, you've got to be prepared for this, it's going to be hard. Is there any kind of, have you figured out what they were talking about?
Definitely. And I'm glad you brought that back up, because sometimes I'm wary when I share that advice that I got, oh, you have no idea how hard this is going to be, because I don't want to discourage anyone from listening, from starting a business, or from taking your business to the next level. And sometimes I think when we kind of commiserate over how challenging it is, it can really frighten people. And I don't think that there's anything anyone could have done or said to really prepare me for how challenging it has been. But I want to be clear that it has been challenging, not in a tragic way, but in a really powerful, growth inspiring, confidence building way. And so even though I spent a lot of the first years in business, and to this day sometimes feeling really scared, if I were to leave with a piece of advice that I would offer, it would be that learning to view those feelings, those scared feelings, as a green light and not a red light. I think when I look back on my business journey to date, that being scared has held me back more than anything. And it took me a long time to recognize, like you said, Melita, like the feeling of scare doesn't have to mean no, right? It can mean this is exciting, this is going to help me grow, this is how I'm learning. And so shifting my perspective on that feeling of being scared has made such a difference. That and hiring a therapist and a business coach, which I definitely recommend. But, through working with a therapist and a business coach and just, working on myself, I've learned to help myself shift that perspective and become, like I said, in the context of thought leadership, but it's true in the larger context as well, like just become a really avid student of myself and notice my feelings and what they mean. And if they might mean not what I think right away, but actually be, kind of an invitation to take another step further.
Brilliant advice. I just love everything about what you've just said and how you've put that across. So I'm not even going to add to that. It's fantastic. So Eva, for anyone who is out and about, I'm going to put all of your contact details on the landing page below. But for anyone who's listening to this on the go, how can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me in two places. One is on LinkedIn. That's the only social media that I use. I am a proud social media monogamist, as I call it. And so LinkedIn is the best place to find me. And, please reach out, send me a note and say you heard me on Melita's show. I would love to connect with you. And then the second place is to go to 5magneticpillars.com. And that's the number 5 and the words magneticpillars.com, because that's the free email course that I mentioned earlier, where I teach you what the 5 pillars of magnetic thought leadership content are and how you can incorporate them into your work.
Amazing, amazing. I'm going to go and check that out myself.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Eva, so much for being on the show. You've just shared so much value and wisdom, and I've loved the energy and everything we've shared today. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Melita, for having me. It was great to be here.